Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pollock and Thurston here on this Wednesday, June the 21st. Hello, Brandon. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm getting ready for a very busy weekend in Toronto, as we have a lot coming our way, including Brandon Thurston, who will be crossing the Canadian border. So all the best with that. It should be a rather headache-free experience for you, I would think.
We'll be doing Wrestlenomics radio at 11 as usual. And then, as soon as I'm done, in the car.
There you go. From Buffalo to Toronto. Well, we look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Someone who will not be in Toronto this weekend, but he will be all over the coverage of Forbidden Door and the follow-up to Collision, which is happening in Toronto. We welcome in the editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave Meltzer. Dave, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing pretty good. How are you guys?
We're doing very well, as I would think that AEW is today with the Collision number coming out, and we want to jump into that right away with you and get some of your immediate reactions to the number. 816,000 viewers on Saturday on TNT, a 0.33 in the demo, 430,000 viewers that translates to. They were behind the College World Series that was happening, as well as the UFC Fight Night, the main card. I would say that overall 0.33. What's your reaction to that number?
Okay. Well, I mean, the UFC main card was after they were over. So they didn't even go. I mean, the UFC.
And they beat the prelims by a significant
amount.
Yeah, they
beat the prelims by a lot. So, I mean, they beat UFC by a lot, but they should have beaten the prelims. I mean, my reaction to the number was going to be pretty much the same no matter what it was, because it really matters. To me, what matters is where you are in a month. I mean, I would consider it. I mean, it's a good number. It's a, it could have been, it's a good number. It's, if you can keep it at, I mean, my feeling is if you can keep it at 0.25, 0.26 on a consistent basis, it's a big hit considering what Saturday night competition is, and Saturday's harder to draw than other nights of the week and everything. But I mean, we've seen this with so many shows. The premiere, there was a lot of hype for the show. It's Punk's first time back. It's the debut of the show. It was heavily hyped. So, I mean, I expected a really good number. And so, so, I mean, they should be happy with it and encouraged that it was a younger audience than, they've been getting for the Friday show. And, I mean, compared to the Friday show, of course, it's big, but it was hyped so much bigger. So, yeah, good first week. But,
did they make it harder for themselves, Dave, in the sense that tonight, you know nothing for show number 2 and that follow-up, and tonight you would think a lot of it should be all about Sunday, and they have to balance both to retain this audience for Saturday, or at least a strong percentage of it, while also pushing this pay-per-view on Sunday. And I think that was a missed opportunity Saturday of not at least whatever the Punk segment is on Saturday, or making it clear Punk is here on Saturday night. And tonight, obviously, you have to make that push for this both back-to-back nights this weekend.
Yeah, and Rampage will get like almost no push probably, because you've got, I mean, the pay-per-view should be the number one focus, but yes, you've got to tell people that, and you've got to have some big stuff, and you probably should do some sort of a match that has an angle that pertains to the pay-per-view to tell you, hey, you got to watch this, and maybe a contenders match or something, the winner gets something, I don't know, but something should be done on Saturday that pertains to the Sunday card. So, but also, Saturday's show this week can really, really heavily hype Sunday because it's the next day, but you can't ignore that on Wednesday because, Wednesday, more likely than not, the audience tonight will be a little bit bigger than Saturday, maybe not this week still. I think in the long run, the Wednesday audience will probably be the stronger audience of the two, but, who knows, night show. But there's Punk been advertised for tonight, by the way, because I haven't seen that.
No, not yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen it advertised, but that's the scuttlebutt.
Okay, I mean, I've only can say I've heard from several wrestlers that he's on the show, so they certainly believe that he's on the show, and so that's I mean, he should be hyped then. I mean, I wouldn't throw him out there as a surprise, but because he should help ratings first time on a Wednesday.
Yeah, and if I'm seeing what's behind you, Dave, right? I think we see the Showbuzz Daily chart in the background, which is very appropriate.
I guess it is, isn't it?
Yeah. So this was higher than I was expecting, and I mean, I totally agree with you that what really matters is what this show is averaging months from now, because that's what's really going to that's what's really going to come into play when WBD assesses what's the value of this extra 2 hours
Sure.
that we're booking here. But it was high. I put out a poll a few days ago, and like over 1,000 people voted for what it's worth, and everybody, the majority of people were guessing something under a 0.30 for the demo, and it did a 0.33. I mean,
go ahead. Yeah. I mean,
it's better than I thought it would be. I mean, I figured it would do about what a Dynamite does, so this is a little bit better than. In the demo, at least, it's a little bit better than what Dynamite has done. I believe it's going back to March. You have to go back to March to find a 3.3 for Dynamite.
Yeah, it's the high end. I mean, Dynamite's usually been, Dynamite's been pretty consistent between 2.8 and 3.3. Has been the range, so it's the high end. But this was hyped more than an average, by far more than an average episode of Dynamite. And Punk's return should have drawn. Well, I actually saw that poll that you did, and it reminded me because when I do similar stuff on pay-per-views.
Yes.
I would say 95% guess low, and usually very low. It's one of those things where I think people, I don't know if whatever it is, I think that they just expect worse. They just think this isn't doing well. They're being told by people this isn't doing well, and then it does well. And it's like after, like after a couple of pay-per-views in a row that are all pretty consistent, when people are telling you this build's been terrible, it's awful, and then the number comes up the same, you'd go like, hey, maybe this is just the number that they're going to be doing, and maybe the build isn't as bad as you think. We maybe, at the end of the day, sometimes, basically you have to learn from this stuff, and AEW is pretty, they have a pretty consistent audience. And we don't know what that number is on Saturday, but I expected a big number. I mean, look, Punk's first return. I felt a lot. I saw the fact that they were in the Google charts. They were the 10th most searched thing, and a regular television show never is. When it comes to wrestling, the UFC wasn't in the top 20, and so I thought, hey, this is probably going to do pretty good. But if it did 1 million viewers and everybody be doing cartwheels, I would say the same thing. Look, the first episode of SmackDown was almost 4 million viewers. It was not indicative of anything. And
I guess I think that like if it's higher, that's low. It's not going to fall as far. If this opened up and did 600,000 viewers or something like that, well,
that'd be concerning.
It's going to fall by a similar percentage. I feel like almost no matter where it starts. But for this episode, there's a lot of younger viewership.
Yep.
It's not in my report, but this is a 45 median age viewer was 45 for this episode,
which is much lower than almost any AEW television show all year, right?
Dynamite was 50 last Wednesday.
Yeah,
for some comparison there. Yeah.
Right.
As we're looking ahead to this Sunday, Dave, what would your read be if we are in a position where this pay-per-view, there's a CM Punk and the Young Bucks? You would think in a normal world, these are both assets on your pay-per-view.
Yes.
Would you expect both of them on this pay-per-view on Sunday? Because now we're getting into like this situation where you're potentially leaving money on the table, especially if you are figuring like a Punk. Is that what, a 20% jump in buys if he is on this show on Sunday?
If he is, he's got to be on the show. If you're going to figure Punk's worth 20%, then he needs to be on the show, and they need to, and it needs to be in a big match. But Omega's on the show anyway. We already know that. So there's no, there's no reason for the Bucks not to be on the show. You're not accomplishing anything by doing that because Omega's already on the show. So as far as that decision-making process goes, look, they all should be on the show. And, and eventually, again, it's like, are you really going to do Wembley without Omega and the Young Bucks? I mean, that's ridiculous. Are you going to do it without Punk? That's ridiculous too. So, you can keep the Young Bucks and Kenny off tonight's show and have Punk on, and it makes all the sense in the world. If I am, there's a lot of things that I would do completely different here, and I certainly wish, that this thing had been settled, on whatever September 4th, as opposed to probably who knows when, if ever, it will be settled. But whatever the decision is to keep them apart, but you can't. But I mean, as far as for tonight, yeah, they made the right call to put Punk on in Chicago and have the other guys in a pre-tape. But they're not on Collision. I mean, they're not on. The Young Bucks and Omega are not on Collision Live. They may do a pre-tape there. But it's like at some point you just got to go. look, they're all top guys, and it just feels. I mean, I know there were people like that, again, with Punk being on the show tonight, one of the top guys was just like, we were, told that we would not have to deal with Punk except for on pay-per-views, and it's like, but here he is, week one. It's not like it's a surprise or anything. It's just, these ideas change, or what people are told change, and people are kind of like, this is the company. It's a new company. That's all there is. That's how people view it. It's a new company. As far as business wise, what that means, we'll find out. And as far as morale wise, it's, it depends on how Punk is. Punk needs to be magnanimous with everyone, and I think he will probably try, at least with most. But there's a lot of divisiveness that, it's so frustrating to me because I see it so closely, and I feel it shouldn't be there. And, it's worse now than it's been. I mean, it hasn't gotten better. Right now, it's at a pretty bad point again.
Is that since the promo on Friday, and this many days? Since the promo has made things worse, in your opinion?
Well, the promo in the ESPN story. Yeah, those, I didn't hear, nobody was really, it's like, okay, it's whatever. And then the ESPN story, which, I mean, it was the talk of the locker room on Wednesday, and, which led to a lot of issues. And then the promo.
Was it what they were expecting, though? Because, I mean, most people read it and expecting it to be controversial, and it was not that controversial, I thought.
Right. I am of the impression that people were expecting worse than it turned out to be. But you still have people the people who really like Adam Page were not happy, and I think there's this feeling of, everyone there is pretty much told, like, keep the stuff on the inside, that if it gets out, it's not good for the company. And then the feeling is that one side is agreeing to do that and the other side is not. But the thing is that on both sides, they think it's the other side. So it becomes like a really weird thing, but it's like,
can you say which side is which there?
Well, I mean, I know, I mean, the one side's more public because, I mean, Punk's the one who said this stuff publicly. But I mean, the thing was, when it comes to the ESPN story is that there's a lot of people who, felt that Page should not have, he shouldn't have gone after Page. Even if privately he believed it, this wasn't the time to do it. And Page, is not someone who's going to answer back. So he becomes, the bad guy, because he can't. I mean, he could, but he doesn't want to be. I mean, if you notice from day one, Page has never said a word about anything. And he's a focal point of the story. And the reason is because, he feels the best thing is to not say anything. And by doing that, I think that, people have looked at and go, oh, did he really, whatever, or that, it's become a tough thing, and it makes it a tough work environment when one side will go after the other, and the other side is not saying anything, which has to frustrate them because they can't say anything, or they feel it's best not to. And then now they're the victims, and, it's just a tough situation. But yes, Saturday people, it was like one of those things of, both sides were told, as far as the Young Bucks. I mean, like there was the feeling that he went after Page because he's friends with the Young Bucks, and he had signed a thing where he couldn't go after the Young Bucks. And then on Saturday on Collision, there's the line, and you can take it a million ways, and it's ambiguous and all that. But if you are looking at it going like, well, he's not supposed to, and he did, then you could say that. And if you just go, it's just a line and who cares? You can look at it that way. There's two ways of looking at that. I mean, when I heard the line, my thought was
talking about the counterfeit bucks.
The counterfeit bucks. But when I heard the line, I'm one Bill Phil, it's like, okay, is he acknowledging? Does he know something that you and I don't know about?
Did he confirm the TV deal? Is what we want to know.
Maybe Jerry McDivitt asked Phil about this before they put that in the lawsuit.
Yeah, but I know, really, but yeah, it's like, is this story true, or is he just, making something up, like taking this story that you and I have not been able to confirm, as far as I know, and I've heard the rumors, for weeks and weeks and weeks, and all that about the $1 billion deal, and he's out there essentially saying this, and on their TV when Tony, is like,
We can't talk about the television contract.
We can't talk about it. We can't talk about it. And here he is saying this to put himself over. And it's like, is this a true story, or is he just, I don't know the answer.
In the logic of like how much, if I'm WBD and I'm going to pay a lot of money for these series of TV shows, I can't imagine committing to a number before knowing what Collision does on average.
I agree with you completely. Yeah.
Because you're buying an empty box. What is this show going to do?
Right. Like if it's going to do a 0.17 or a 0.26, in television, that's a giant difference, especially going forward. So yeah, if as far as like committing to a number, I mean, you've got to know what the value of the show is. So it's like my gut, not knowing anything, is that from their standpoint, they'll probably, it'll be something for a year from now or whatever. Yeah, a year from now is probably, or 10 months from now is where you're really going to get into that stuff. So any number, unless they've already agreed to something, they're keeping it quiet. It feels like any number would be something that would be determined based on, more than anything, Collision, because I think we know, I think that Dynamite's pretty consistent where it is, and I don't know that could it drop a little bit because there's 2 shows, possibly.
And Rampage too, I think,
Rampage I think is going to get killed, but I don't anticipate it building from where it is, because it can't, if you only have so many hours, and Rampage is very clearly going to be the C show. So and not even like, again, on Wednesday nights, we saw it last week on Wednesday, they barely promoted Rampage, which is funny because the number was higher than it's been, but I mean, it was barely touched on. It's like you didn't have any hype for that weird mixed match. They kind of mentioned at the end Will Ospreay would be on the show, but not even talking about the match. I didn't even, from watching the TV, I wouldn't have even known that there was a Takeshi to Bandito match. Not that that's a big marketable match, but it's a match on paper that's a great match. So
as far as like where AEW gets valued in the next round, I could see, and I guess just for background, I think we both asked Tony in press conferences whether there's a new deal, or whether basically he said that it's just an extension. It's just there's extra money, but it's the same term. So this is still a deal that's ending either this year or next year. It sounds like option is probably going to happen, and that's going to mean it's going to end at the end of 2024.
September, end of September.
So is it September? Okay.
Yeah. The deal's at the end of September. Yeah.
So, and I think, $1 billion, that would supposedly be over, is it 4 or 5 years? Anyway, it comes out to about $200 million average annual value. And that does, especially if we're talking 2 hours of Dynamite, 1 hour of Rampage, 2 hours of Collision, a total of 5 hours weekly. And if Collision, it ranks number 3 among cable originals on Saturday. If it continues to do fairly well, I'm sure it's not going to do I'm sure it's not going to do like number 3, or maybe not even in the top 5, but maybe it stays in the top 10. And if Dynamite continues to perform as well as it has been, roughly, I could see this being $200 average annual value. If you compare it to like just where SmackDown is right now, just with its 2 hours, and yes, it's got about double the viewership, but that's about $205 million average annual value. So I could see it's not unrealistic, in other words.
No, not at all. Not at all. If you compare it to, and there's other things too. There's the pay-per-view,
and there's next day rights to play with here, and maybe something happens with pay-per-view even.
Yeah, like could you do the pay-per-view deal the way the WWE does, and those pay-per-views are worth something, considerable. You can always do streaming specials. I don't know that you really need them when you got 3 TV shows a week, but again, maybe 2. He
says he's still going to do Battle of the Belts too.
I saw. Yeah, I know. I don't know what again, it's whatever it's. But again, their numbers. Like the number for this, they were doing between a 0.11 and a 0.14 on Saturday nights with whatever they were putting on in that time slot. So even if we figure a normal fall, they're going to be way above what the station was doing. So on Wednesday night, they're beating what the station's going to do with Big Bang Theory. On Saturday, they're beating what they would probably do with movies. On Friday, I don't know. Fridays, there's some weeks where they're probably not doing much better, but most weeks I think they're doing a little better. So they're above what the station's doing. So they have a value there. 3 shows a week. Look, the thing is, if they do 175, 200 million, the key to all that is the company becomes a giant success financially for Tony. Tony's investment in the long run pays off. Tony's commitment pays off. And, all the people who were expecting him to go belly up are wrong, because they won't go belly up with a deal at that level. And,
do
unless
you see this as sort of CM Punk's swan song, is this being like a last run? You get this company, this transformative deal. Like, he's 44 at this point. He's gone through, the wear and tear of wrestling, much less those years of training MMA at this level. We've seen the injuries of the last year. Like, are you looking at this as this is kind of CM Punk's final, big contribution to pro wrestling, and leaving on this note with launching them on a Saturday night? He's going to be the difference maker if this is going to be a success on Saturday.
I'm sure that will be something that he would like to do.
And I think he knows very well that the leverage he has here, like, you could argue he is the most important person in either company when it comes to these contract years.
When it comes to leverage, he has incredible leverage, and he knows that, and he knows it because, things have happened in the last couple of months, and, look, Ace Steel's back in the company. And I mean, that tells you everything about the leverage that he has, because do you think that again, the majority of people in that dressing room, and granted, he couldn't get Ace Steel in the dressing room, but he did get him hired. But people who, know what happened with Ace Steel and everything, I don't think anyone ever expected Ace Steel to be back with AEW. And he was, and, and that's another story, because of, he was, and it was pretty much kept secret. I mean, and even, it's this balancing act that Tony's been trying to do. And it's tough, trying to placate everybody. And keep us from knowing everything.
And it's honestly,
a really
the
interesting
promo,
situation.
Dave, is like, coming out of that promo, the focus was the Bucks line. It was secondary to, like, the idea of this, like, dueling champions on 2 shows program. And if you are hoping to lessen the focus on this, it is more heightened than ever, because when you hear that line, the audience is now directed in, this is where this is naturally going, and that's going to just resurface, and the questions are just going to reemerge, because now your own performer has introduced it on TV.
Yeah. I mean, if you are a wrestling fan and you do not follow us, or even if you do, you're thinking like, I mean, even me, I'm when it was over, it's like, hey, did something happen in the last 2 days? And then it was, no, it didn't. And then it's like, then why did he do it? And it's because, and the answer is because he can, right? He can. If they were to do the same thing on the next promo, which they won't, would they be sat down? And I don't know. Maybe Tony would go, well, it's just retribution, and this is all fun and games, and it's causing controversy. I don't know what Tony's going to do. I mean, everybody promised to do something, and it's a really weird situation.
Is there any chance of Punk being at the press conference Sunday night? If he's on this pay-per-view, you figure he's going over, and do you put him in that setting, or is that the last thing you're thinking about doing this weekend?
I think that he would put him in that setting, and who knows where that will go. But if he win, if he's in a position, look, he's on the show, he's going to win a match. I mean, beating him would be insane. I
actually heard a really great idea from one of our listeners, of the idea of MJF no-showing as he is threatened.
Oh,
and then your stand-in champion of Punk, you get your Tanahashi match with Punk, and that's your involvement. I just would not do that as a surprise if Punk is wrestling Sunday night.
Yes, I have had several people speculate that to me. So I think between that belt and the MJF no showing thing, I think people have tried to put one and one together. And I mean, look, when the first person who told me that, I said, you know what? That's a possibility. I could see that. But here's the thing. It's like, what Punk said, I don't know how much of that has to do with storyline. Some of it does, some of it doesn't. And that becomes, it's like, is that just something that he said? Because as far as like him and, when the thing was over, it's like, oh, him and MJF probably, right? And then it's like, oh, it's not as sure as you think. So, I mean, eventually they have to do it though. Eventually they have to do it though. But, was it supposed to be on this interview? I've had people tell me that maybe it wasn't. So, but
the funny thing in the quarter hours is that the promo, which was vaguely about the Elite and a little bit about MJF, right? Nothing about Samoa Joe. And
nothing about Jay and Juice.
But the match did quite well in the quarter hours. It was the peak for the demo. So there was more viewership in the demo for the match, for the main event match, than for the promo itself.
Yes. Well, I think that there's probably the curiosity of what's going to look like in the ring. It's the first time.
It was a good match.
So yeah, I mean, it was. Hey, look, it's positive when it comes to the AEW usual pattern. It's very rare. It happens on occasion, but it's very rare where usually the final 2 quarters are the 2 lows. And this one, which it's also a different night. I think Saturday dynamics are different from Wednesday.
And this doesn't have the Big Bang Theory starting out high for those early quarters and then sliding after.
Right. Yeah. But that's not so much on the demo, because the demo peak is usually not quarter 1. The viewer peak very often is. The demo peak could be quarter 2, 3, 4. But it's usually in 2, 3, 4, or 5. It's usually not in 7 or 8. But yeah, that was good. And I mean, the one thing that really impressed me or surprised me or whatever that I really took notice of was Punk and Joe when they first were about to clash and the place went nuts. And my thought is like everything you hear and everything you know what I mean about like, oh, it's the casuals and this and that. And it's like, this is 9,000 people in Chicago. And granted, it's a punk city, but
they all watched their ROH DVDs. They knew.
Well, whatever it is, this is a feud from 18 to 20 years ago. It did hit Chicago, and it probably drew 500 people in Chicago 18 to 20 years ago. They were not on TV. It was not a big television feud, and they went in there, and everybody knew about Punk and Joe. So that tells you that this, which is so long ago, and emotionally they reacted to it. It's not like I read it in the history books 20 years ago. The reaction was so big. So it tells you that there is an awareness by this audience that is far more than most people will expect, at least with me. Like if it was one of those things where, there was a pop to some people. Yeah, I knew that would happen. But when it's as big as it was, it's telling you that there is a knowledge of CM Punk and Samoa Joe and the program, and that program they didn't even do it that program wasn't even in TNA on television on Spike. I mean, this program was no television. It was Ring of Honor. It was the early years of Ring of Honor, long before the peak of Ring of Honor, which was many, many years later. And there you go.
What's your thought on Saturday night Collision in Toronto? When this date was first announced, I thought this show was easily good for 7,000 people. We currently stand at just under 4,500. There has been some reductions in ticket pricing. What's just your thought on like some of the softer ticket sales in Canada outside of Forbidden Door?
Look, I think people didn't know what Collision was, and I think that now, I mean, the one thing is like now, I mean, look, like 2 weeks ago it was 1,500. So
it's been a big boost this last.
Yeah, if they're going to go in there with 5,000 to 6,000 people, now I consider that a big success. And yeah, some of it's reducing prices, and some of it is the expectation of Punk. And look, it shows that he can draw. And you didn't know. I mean, like when he was there the first time. At the beginning, all business was good. And then business was starting to normalize. And I mean, I remember when they announced in Chicago, I think it was, and granted there was a blizzard, but I think that, they did the MJF and Punk match in Chicago before to build the dog collar match. And I thought, okay, now that match that had been built so big on television added to Wintrust, they'll fill Wintrust, and they didn't. It didn't even move a lot. Like we've seen so many times where there's a big match announced on the week before on a Wednesday for the next Wednesday, and it's real big, and the ticket sales don't really move that much. And I'm going like, God, it's a big match. So it's kind of like, you go in there with, the people who want to buy right away, and then you trickle in from there. And of late, somewhat because of the lowering of the ticket prices, we are getting more of a WWE pattern where there's a lot of buys in the last week, or a lot of comps in the last week in some cases too.
And I don't know if you guys have seen the latest numbers. I'm looking at them now for Collision, and Toronto is at 4,800.
Well, that's good compared to 2 weeks ago.
Hamilton, which is the one that was at 800 or so, is now at 1,600. So it's still under 2,000, but it has doubled at least. And these are all updates since Collision has aired.
Yeah, but one of the things we don't know is what are paid and what are comps.
True.
You know, because the number of comps for AEW, I mean, it used to be 200 and 300, you know, a week, and it's considerably higher, you know, on a lot of these Wednesdays. I mean, it's still, you know, I mean, but there's a lot of cities that had very weak advances, you know, Collision in Toronto being one of them, where it ends up respectable. So it's like, I'm not so much, you know, but again, like, yeah, what you said, is it going to be as good as the Toronto number? If you're talking to me about this, like, yeah, I would have Toronto with CM Punk first time, the pay-per-view sold out. Yeah, I would have expected 7,000 to 9,000, right? Yeah.
Do you throwing Punk out of the mix on Sunday night? Do you have like a viewpoint on the buys for this show? I'm pretty high on what this show is going to do. Like, I don't see it. I certainly see it topping last year's number, and potentially by a considerable margin. I think like there's a big intrigue in this show, and especially if you do a last minute angle with Punk, I think that only exceeds the potential
last
ceiling.
Year is about 140 or so when you count all
140-ish.
New Japan World. Is this also on New Japan World this year?
I believe so. I actually don't wish for sure. You might maybe check on that. I thought when they announced Ospreay and Omega and Danielson and Okada that it would be a very good number. I thought it would be the biggest number since what was it? The Double or Nothing from 2022, right? The Hangman and Punk match. I thought it would be the biggest, but I've not been overwhelmed by the build. You know, I mean, tonight's obviously a real key night, because now it's like we've got those two matches, and there's, you know, we haven't seen Okada on TV, and he's not, you know, I mean, I presume he'll be on tonight. He should be. And you know, we've seen no real back and forth other than Danielson doing some promos, and it's very much a hardcore fan match, which is a much bigger percentage of the buys than people give it credit for. But Omega and Ospreay has had the one thing on TV last week that was very strong, but we need promos back and forth, and that's not happening tonight because we know Omega's not there.
It is listed on New Japan World as a pay-per-view, by the way.
Okay. So the thing is, so those first two matches to me were super strong, and I thought, yeah, way above, but I haven't seen, you know, like the other stuff, like Sonata and Jungle Boy to me is just a match. It doesn't mean anything big or not. I mean, in the ring, I think it'll be a good match, but, and then MJF and Tanahashi, the tagline on that is that MJF is threatening not to show up. So I don't think that is a great lure to sell, to get people to buy the show. And we haven't had an undercard. And I mean, that's the thing. It's like, who's Moxley wrestling? Who are the Young Bucks wrestling? Who is Jericho wrestling? And I mean, all of those things, it's, you know, who is, you know, whatever, you know, I mean,
this is a really busy show tonight, Dave. When
tonight's
you have all
got
the things that are listed, like this blind draw tournament draw is thrown in there and stuff. Yep. I mean, it's just like, this seems like a really packed episode where, again, like I'm basing my optimism really on those top two matches and the potential of a Punk match, because I think that's what's either selling people on the show or not. It's not like last year where it was this fully fleshed out card. And I mean, that one had its criticism going into it, but
a lot of it. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, yeah, I mean, if, you know, Punk's on the show, I mean, I was expecting for Saturday night. I mean, I was expecting the tag match to end and a stare down between, because I didn't expect somebody to go and beat up Punk on night one on night one, but I did expect somebody to pop out at the end of that show, whether it was Kenta or whether it was somebody even, or just a video of a Japanese guy, you know, who wasn't there. And, you know, Ishii or, you know, Minoru Suzuki, who we know, who was on the show tonight, you know, just these different guys, someone to go in there and give you the Punk match, because I think that with the Punk match, yeah, I think we get to 160, right? But Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's all dependent on it's all dependent. But I haven't seen like to me of the 4 matches that have been announced, as far as the stuff that's been said and done and angle to really hype me more than the announcement of the match itself on that Dominion show. I haven't seen it yet, but obviously tonight is super important and Saturday is super important because those are the key shows to really hype those by. So, an evaluation of how the show does is probably best for tomorrow or maybe late Saturday night. But I do think it should be last year just based on those top 2 matches. Yeah.
Before we let you go here, Dave, we do have one question coming in from a listener who just wanted to ask a bit about the MLW case. And with a judge believing it has merit to go to trial, do you guys think that the U.S. government will look into an antitrust case against WWE? So pretty overarching question, but I know you've spoken about this in terms of just following the antitrust case with the UFC over the last decade. Were you surprised, first of all, at sort of the reversal of the judge's decision last week that really just backed all of the MLW claims after it seemed like this thing was just holding on by a thread a month prior?
Yeah, I was really surprised. I mean, it wouldn't have stunned me for the case not to have been thrown out. But yeah, I mean, he basically almost threw it out the first time. And when I read the amended complaint, it was like, this isn't that much different other than it's funny because the Reels thing and the Peacock thing, for this case, it was bad for MLW because they seemingly have lost Reels, but it was great for the case because now it's like, that clause in the WWE thing of nobody, being of complete exclusivity, absolutely hurt the competition that had a deal. That's whether it's enough to win a lawsuit, that I don't know, but it absolutely gives the case more sizzle or whatever. But the way that when I read the judge's ruling itself, and Brandon, you let me know what you think. When I read the ruling, it felt like the judge was like, you know what? I mean, it was on every like the judge didn't really go back and forth. I mean, it was just like, yes, this has merit. Yes, this has merit. Yes, this has merit. And McDivitt wrote what I thought were some pretty compelling arguments against it, and he threw all of them out with no reservation.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's not the judge saying I agree with MLW's arguments, but just saying that this is good enough to go to trial and to go to discovery will be next. It probably doesn't hurt that this is in California, and I've talked to a couple lawyers about this case, and at least one person thinks that, this being in California will make it an easier case to get through for MLW, just because I guess they have supposedly more liberal judges. But one of the big arguments in the case is whether or not there's a market here that WWE supposedly has a monopoly on. And WWE's argument was that there is no pro wrestling media rights market. And of course, MLW is arguing that there is. And that seems to be the key decision that the judge had to make, was that yes, there is, even though it is a small niche market, there is what they call a relevant market for this case, which is the pro wrestling media rights market in the United States. WWE was trying to argue that zombie shows were mentioned in WWE's filings. There's all these different programs that we're competing with, and I'm not a legal expert, but the judge thought that MLW's case about that point was compelling enough to let it go.
Yeah, one of the things too is if AEW gets that deal that Punk allegedly or seemed to allude to, I think that really helps WWE's side.
Yeah, interestingly, the WWE tried to say in their filing that, hey, look, AEW has a new deal worth $240 million a year, which is not a true story as far as I know. And MLW did dispute that already, though.
Yeah. And then I've heard people go like, what is that? How does the judge look at that kind of a thing where it's like they threw something out, and even though they qualified it by saying it's been reported, I mean, they threw something out that, as best we can tell, was not true.
Right.
And, again, with the judge in court arguing that in your attempt to throw it out, that probably didn't help them.
No, I don't think at all. But it is one that as well, like as Brandon mentions, the next step being discovery. Is that where WWE sort of just let's just get this away because we do not want to go and take that next step into this. But that is sort of where this is kind of on the doorstep of, and that becomes very interesting if we get into that level of, granularity when it comes to these.
And I don't know what they'll
WWE
be able to
deals.
seal and keep from the public. Is they might be able to submit some things into Discovery, but not necessarily have to make them public so people like us can see them. But we could, I don't know. The thing that comes to mind first for me is, are we going to see TV rights contracts be a part of Discovery? And
I think for
whether
sure
there is exclusivity clauses in these deals. And is there anything here that WWE would rather pay the cost of settling versus let that stuff be public?
Well, and here's the other one. It's just like how much of contract information with the talent will be out, because like with the UFC lawsuit, I mean, as far as like how much certain people made is not exactly, it's not specified. They were able to keep that much, individual things quiet to a degree, but they still were able to get, like that Brock Lesnar made $8 million for the Mark Hunt fight, which nobody knew. And that did come out in Discovery, and it was not like Brock Lesnar made $8 million, but it was like there was a fighter at UFC 200 who made $8 million. And obviously that's Brock Lesnar. So, there are, and also, things that, Conor McGregor didn't, up to that point in time when the last round of Discovery was talking, which is a few years back, that Conor had never actually made over 8 million when a lot of people thought he had made far more. And he had certainly claimed that he had. So it's like, how much of that will come out? How much will it, but I mean, as far as like the percentage or the total number, as far as of pay that they give to the talent of their total revenue, I mean, that did come out in the UFC case. And I think that probably will come out in this case, as far as, is it 8%? Is it 12%? Is it 15%? I think that we will know that. I think there's a lot of things like that will, contracts. I think, right, TV rights contracts, I think we'll get a lot of, or, WWE will settle. I mean, one of the things is that if this was a Vince McMahon decision, I think that there'd be a part of Vince, knowing Vince, that he would want to fight it and win. And but is Ari Emanuel going to have that same thought process, especially in the case of the, look, they've got two companies that both have antitrust lawsuits against each other, and they're trying to merge them, even though they're in separate fields. They're sort of, it's like, then how does that look? So there's a lot of, there's a lot of interesting things that can happen out of the case. And, the dynamic of, do we just pay to make it go away? Which they didn't do with the UFC one, but with the UFC one, the amount of money to pay to make it go away is astronomical. I think it's far more than in this case. So the fact that they have not paid for the UFC case to go away is something. I mean, it's the decision Ari made, and we'll have to, it's something. But I think that in this one, I don't think that, again, the amount that they would have to pay to make it go away is not nearly as much. So maybe that will happen, because, but, and the other part of that with the Kung case, the UFC cases, things gone on for like 10 years, and it's like, is this thing going to go on forever and ever? And I think that one of the reasons I think it's gone on is because, I mean, the judge I think the judge just doesn't want to make any rulings, because it's, if he does,
significant precedent, if they come down in favor of the fighters, and what that potentially opens up to, because then you have the carry-on case with like the Cajun Johnson one that carries up until modern day fighters as well. And as you've alluded to as well, like this, it very much mirrors the WWE's system of operation, and whether there would be that grouping that would see that, connect the dots, and want to move forward with something like that. But it's a very, very long road for that, but probably would be a lot lesser of a path if you have that precedent out there.
The precedent from UFC would open up WWE or close up WWE, for that, one way or another. And I thought, like, this is something I thought had been settled years and years ago. And I don't know if it's, I don't know how a court case goes for 10 years, but this one has.
Last thing, just as you brought up his name, does it stun you that we went through the whole Dana White incident with his wife after New Year's Eve, and last night Conor McGregor's on ESPN for an hour, and it just seemed as though like I didn't see any sort of like real complaints or outrage about this. It was as though like I haven't seen ESPN address the situation in any fashion at all. And just when you read that, like the man is innocent until proven guilty, but given the pattern of all the different allegations and this being the latest one, and here he is, like this is not like some obscure network he's on, it's on ESPN, and it just seems as though it's whatever, if it's under the radar or just when we see the furor that Dana White received in the Conor thing, it just seemed to be the opposite.
Yeah, and the Conor charges are a million times more serious too. I don't it's look, the Dana thing amazed me, as far as like, and we've seen it with Floyd too. I for whatever reason, the standards that wrestling fans want to have on wrestlers are so much more stringent than if you look at a lot of real sports and stars and things like that who can get away with a lot. And in put it this way, many careers in wrestling have been destroyed for less than what Conor is alleging. And if something happened with someone in wrestling who was a minor character or even a somewhat major character, and this story broke the way it did, they'd be gone. Like if this story broke with, and even a major guy, I think they'd be gone until at least they were exonerated. And but UFC, it's completely different. Ain't gonna hold up Conor fighting. I mean, I knew that right away. And yeah, he's on the reality show. No one's saying a word. The case is out there. Look, the case is getting more pub than a case with any pro wrestler would get, or maybe one or two of the top pro wrestlers would perhaps be different, but almost any. But yeah, it's business as usual, and the nature of it's an interesting story because some of the charges and everything like that, and the videos are out, and everyone can jump on the videos and everything, and it's like it's a confusing case. It's not a slam dunk case, put it that way, where you look at it. But at the same time, it's like, there's no one putting him on hold either.
Well, Dave, thank you as always. You're very generous with your time jumping on with us. Of course, you can follow all of his work in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, as well as plenty of audio shows with Brian Alvarez up at WrestlingObserver.com. It's a very busy weekend coming up, so all the best to you, Dave, and a trip to England coming up soon. So you'll have to fit that. That should be another insane week for you.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of fun. I mean, there's a lot going on. Next couple of months, like I've been saying all along, next couple of months are going to be really, really interesting. I think there's a very pivotal period, the next 4 to 6 months in the long-term history of pro wrestling.
I mean, between the two television contracts and the merger, it's a gigantic series of like months coming up over the next 12 for sure.
Yeah.
Dave, thanks as always. Hope we can do this again with you sometime, and all the best.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yep. Good to see you, Brandon.
Brandon Thurston joining us here. So there we have Dave Meltzer joining us from the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Always great to catch up with him as well. Brandon, you are going to be making your way up to Toronto. What are kind of your feelings on Forbidden Door going into this show? Does this feel like a big show?
The lineup going in is stronger than last year's Forbidden Door, and for that reason, I would think this is going to do a little bit better than what last year's Forbidden Door did. There's no Punk on that show last year. There may or may not be Punk this year. Even if there's not, I think that the two headline matches, Omega and Ospreay.
Is Punk a medium difference, a big difference? Like if he is,
he's a medium difference. He's a medium difference. I mean, let's think about like what was the last pay-per-view that he was on. He was on All Out, and did like 140 maybe. And so I think the New Japan element adds something extra here. And yeah, I think the Bryan and Okada match, the Ospreay and Kenny Omega match, that's bigger than anything that was on Forbidden Door last year.
Yes, I would definitely say I would say both those two matches to me feel like last year was, the main event was Moxley and Tanahashi, not their first choice with the Punk injury, but yeah,
They
I would
stared
say
at each other for forever, and people bought that pay-per-view. What can you say?
That's right. We had the forever stare down going into that show. Maybe,
but I think it's a bigger lineup, and I know a lot of what drove Forbidden Door to do well was some of those late buys. That's what really puts it over the edge, right? And they've got to deliver a great show, and we got two top line matches that are certainly capable of doing that.
And you have not contributed to this boost in Hamilton numbers. You and Gullo are not making the trip to Hamilton.
I've not contributed to the Hamilton WrestleTix count.
No. Have you been following any Dark Side of the Ring? Have you watched any of the episodes this season? I just saw the Matt Bourne one last night. This was quite a strange episode. We will talk about it more tonight on.
Have you seen the SmackDown quarter hours?
Why don't you go over them
Yes.
with us if you so choose? So this was not at the level of the 1,000-day celebration, but the show built around Jey Uso's decision. It was another very, very strong number one on television Friday night on Fox.
Right. So the last big one was that the previous week, where
2 weeks ago was the 1,000-day episode.
Right, the 1,000-day celebration, and that got up to something like 2.9 million viewers. So not quite 3, but almost. This was 2.765 million viewers total. In a demo, it did 0.76. This is a huge quarter. The previous quarter did 2.3 million viewers. This did just over 2.7 million viewers. So that's a 19% quarter-to-quarter difference. The demo.
I think there was an entire quarter dedicated to Roman just walking down to the ring for that entrance.
Well,
it was like a 10-minute entrance.
To go even longer then.
Yeah. No,
it's another data point telling you this Bloodline storyline is doing really, really well, and there's just no denying it.
No. Do you think it is changed at all people's perception coming out of WrestleMania that there seemed to be such a response to the title change? And while it's sort of incomplete because we don't know what a Cody Rhodes winning the big match, what that impact would have been. But certainly this does not hurt the company in any way. And it feels like this Bloodline story, it's found its next chapter that has been very engaging for the audience. The numbers are clearly backing that up. Like, this is the thing that is the clear number one story in pro wrestling. So
right. I guess
screen.
The question is, if Roman loses the title to Cody at WrestleMania, you could still tell the story. The title isn't necessary for the story. You don't get to call it the 1,000-day title celebration or whatever. But you could still do the story and the will they, won't they, stay together and all that stuff. Is it as big of a deal? Are there as many viewers if he doesn't have the title? Probably close. It's probably still pretty big. It might not be as big because he doesn't feel as important if he's not keeping the title. And what's the trade-off then? Does Cody's quarter hours and the net rating do a little bit better? I don't know, but it's not obvious to me, and it's on its face a big success.
Also coming up over the next couple of days, Thursday, Tony Khan will be doing his regular conference call with members of the media, and we will see what is asked and what is covered in that. And then on Sunday at the press conference, what is your expectation of any interesting figures that make their way onto the dais in front of the media?
If I'm Tony Khan, I do not want CM Punk up there.
I think there's part of it where you watch his public demeanor that it just seems he wants to be so far distanced from this, but he can't help himself in these situations to create these like spectacles.
You talking about Punk or Tony?
Tony. It just seems that though, like, would it stun me? No. But it, yeah, it would probably be the last thing I would want coming out of Sunday. Not to say that you'd necessarily get a replication, but you also can't disqualify that either. If he is just put in front of the media and the questions he is getting in that setting and who he maybe picks out from there, that he is going to just make his assumptions of who knows who.
I mean, I have to think he's under something like an NDA or something like that he can't say certain things about certain people. And we've seen Tony jump through hoops about, that subject, about the fight.
That would be my first question then.
Right.
Are you under an NDA?
Are you under an NDA? Are you under an NDA to cover your NDA? But yeah, I mean, it depends on if he wrestles, and there's no confirmation he's going to wrestle. I just, it's not worth the risk to me to put him up there, right? Like there'll be some benefit in getting people talking and getting attention in media stories, mostly through the wrestling media, as long as he doesn't go too far, of having him there. But the risk is far greater, right? The risk is, tearing apart your morale of your locker room again.
I thought that you guys had a really great discussion on Wrestlenomics this past week in regards to sort of the coverage of this story, and just a larger one when it comes to wrestlers, officials being on the record. And you're never going to have a system where that is like that clear level of transparency. But I do feel there's enough room in between what we operate today in and what is achievable, that is both having a dialogue out there, that there's a level of transparency that I think does boost a lot of trustworthiness in your audience that you're hearing directly. And I would say in this case, I mean, would there have been this grand harm in having comments in terms of like Kenny Omega and the Bucks did not speak to Mark Raimondi in the ESPN article? Like, this thing is not working itself out. Dave is mentioning the fact it is worse now since Friday than it had been prior. And it just seems to me like there is, I think, certainly more of a discussion to be had, that there are areas of this industry that still exist in the just everything is off the record, or it is just cloaked in supreme secrecy, which some of the most mundane news items that you are provided is off the record. You can't talk about this. You can't ever share this with anybody. And it just seems like
I think part of the fear is that if I'm on the record talking to so-and-so wrestling journalist, and nobody else is, does that make me, everybody points at me as being the source of all this information and stuff like that, I guess. Well, they can certainly guess who's talking to who. But there's two factors that are happening here, right? One is just the legacy of the kayfabe and, protect the business. And the other factor is the quality of the wrestling media and the semi-professional amateur, quality of the wrestling media, where you've got, unless it's ESPN, where, Mark Raimondi will do an article. He works for ESPN, and everybody knows what the ESPN brand means. And people like CM Punk will give him quotes. I guess I just don't know what's like, we're getting into a conflict of interest and things that I should be talking about, I think. But like, what are the wrestling media outlets that would be good candidates for this, for giving on the record comment to?
Well, I would think that it ultimately is, I think from a PR perspective, if you're WWE or AEW, it is, first of all, having the belief that it is of value to us to have that kind of transparency with our audience, and therefore going to your sites that are going to be your both high volume and also ones that are of a certain level that are very respected. A fight.
It requires the PR departments of WWE and AEW to be discerning about wrestling media
and feeling that need to have that. And I guess from a selfish standpoint, you're certainly always going to covet like that, like some degree of transparency. And I'm not stating that, okay, you have to just like open the books to us if you're AEW, but I do feel there's a lot of stories, and you mentioned this, the fact that these stories get out, that they would be so easy to rectify if you had that kind of ability to put something out there that is both accurate and can curb a lot of stories before they get out of the gate and run afoul of people.
And the other issue I raised was, well, why, if you have a Twitter account or you have an Instagram account, you can make comments on the record at any time. So I would love people to give John Pollock. Everybody should give John Pollock comments on the record, by the way. But like, what's the incentive when you have in your pocket all the on the record access that you want? It's not like it was pre-social media, where it was hard unless you were in front of a media outlet or on television or something like that. It was hard to get a public message out there. That's not the case today.
What do you feel your access yourself would benefit if you were reaching out and you are Brandon Thurston from Sports Illustrated, if you're Brandon Thurston from like a legacy outlet, and how much that helps you as well?
I think it's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's. I mean, I did an article once for Vice Media, Motherboard, and it was about a W Network survey or something. And like, if I was just writing for Wrestlenomics, which you know, I wasn't doing that to this level at the time, but it was because I was writing for Vice, which was a more recognizable brand name. I mean, it's not even, I would say it's not even the you know, Sports Illustrated. But I was able to get a comment out of WB because of that. And they definitely weren't going to do that if I was writing for a wrestling news site.
Yeah. I mean, that, you know, for years, I think has been like a WWE, you know, very indoctrinated decision, is that when there is an arrest, when there is, you know, a significant story, like they more often than not are not going to comment on the record, sometimes even with larger outlets. But if ever something is going to come out, you are going to see it on a TMZ or a New York Post or something of that level. But more often than not, I feel if they believe it's a wrestling contained story, they're just not going to address it, and we're just going to move on.
Right. Is that the right strategy? I mean, I'm not like asking this like with a strong opinion either way. I'm just trying to observe what the incentives are. You know, like, is that the right strategy if you want to contain bad press? Is that the right thing to do? Does engaging with the wrestling media make it better?
Well, I think if we're being specific, I think in the grand scheme of things, I think sadly, I think there is merit to that strategy of you just plow through whatever negativity comes your way, and the news cycle will sweep that story into the background. But we also look at a story that, in the larger scope of things we have covered, it's not life and death, this whole Punk situation over the last year, but it has hung over this company. And just when you think they're slowly moving away from it, it comes back with a vengeance. And I think there are certainly, there's clearly that we have heard firsthand in the last week, like a frustration among people out there that there has not been enough of a clear indication. Like, there is no even indication that this backstage incident occurred from the AEW side. Like, they have not even stated that. And I think there is a line of confidentiality versus just not insulting your audience to such a degree that we won't even acknowledge this happened. I think it only goads your audience to want more and to seek more, including
I
media
agree.
as well,
And
but just
Tony's
want answers.
had many chances to comment on it. Many times he's been asked, and he's apparently decided that that's what he wants to do. He just wants to avoid it altogether. And I don't think that that's served him well.
If you go back to the press conference in question at All Out, part of that was when Nick Hausman was asking his question, and Tony butts in on the Colt Cabana discussion and apologizes to Punk, stating, "I shouldn't have said no comment." Or what was did he say at the time? "I should have said no comment.
I should have just no commented it." Yeah, I think
that was his question in and of itself. And perhaps that is, you know, an experience for him that, I mean, only backs up his belief of just don't address anything and it doesn't become a story. But I think over this last year, I think that strategy has been grating on people because they are at least enough aware to know that this is a strategy that is being executed in public. And the fact is, this is playing itself out on your television, whether you are aware or not. And it is both like you're building this show around this controversy in a roundabout way, while at the same time stating nothing to see here. This is nothing to even acknowledge. And yet so much of that attention on Saturday was because of this controversy and Punk's first words since then.
Yeah, and I don't think either of us are saying that he should have a long talk and explain to us all of his thoughts and feelings and experiences surrounding the all-out fight. But
no, I'm just saying there's a wide gulf between.
But there's a modicum of a comment that he could have made, because clearly Punk is able to say what he said in the ESPN article, which again is not a description of. It's not my side of the story of the fight, but the things that led up to it and whatever. And Kenny Omega has made, again, not a narrative of what happened, but he has made comments around the story in a Renee Paquette interview. So clearly, Tony is not legally bound. Whether there's legal liability, I suppose, is a different question. But clearly, if they can if they can have comments to the extent that they have, I would think certainly Tony could.
That's all this thing needs is a lawsuit to attach to it. All right. We are going to wrap things up, but thanks to everybody for joining us here. We've got DJ Convoy. This WWE comment on backstage fights. They have, if we're going back a long ways, but when the infamous Hartford fight happened between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, they addressed it on the air on Raw the very next week, actually. And did state it on camera. Now, the fact is, I think that had this been a backstage incident between these parties and everyone was back to TV and it was, a statement came out or not, I think that the fact, like, there is something to be said about the fact that there were repercussions that came out of this. There were suspensions, and it had such a massive effect on the company in the months coming out of it. I don't know if we have like a great example of that in WWE, at least over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, if the factors here are that it was many of the top stars, including the top star of the company. There were suspensions. At least some of them are in employee status. Our executives are literally executive vice presidents of the company. And you vacated the titles the next day and didn't offer any additional explanation. Maybe something else could have been said in addition.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Jericho and Lesnar had their skirmish at SummerSlam a few years ago. That comes to mind.
It was way back. Sin Cara and Simon Gotch got into a
That's right. Yes.
Brief fist fight. Was still real. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, Brandon, I look forward to seeing you this weekend. So again, Wrestlenomics still going live this Sunday morning, and then Brandon will be jumping into the Wrestlenomics mobile and coming up to Toronto for Forbidden Door, yes. And no stop in Hamilton for Brandon. So if you maybe you can wave to him from your Hamilton estate as he zips by to get back to Buffalo as soon as possible on Monday. You're going home Monday?
I'm going home after the press conference.
Oh boy, that's a long day for you, as it will be for all of us. So you can follow patreon.com/Wrestlenomics, and on our side of the fence, we will be live tonight at 10 Eastern after Rewind to Dynamite, where I think we will be doing a lot of rewinding and a lot of recapping of what goes on a very busy show. And then we are doing the double shot immediately after Dynamite on postwrestlingcafe.com. Tonight we're chatting about what happened to Doink the Clown, the episode from Tuesday night covering Matt Bourne. So that will be the original Doink the Clown. So quite the episode to discuss and dissect. So you can join us for that. And Brandon and I will be back next week. Guest to be determined. It's always nice when people are reaching out to you, Brandon, to come on the show. So we're starting to gain that influence among people where they come to us. Makes the booking a whole lot easier.
They're reaching out to you.
Yes, but by extension, you, especially if you have a history with these people. So that helps too.
Okay.
On that cryptic note, we will say goodbye. For Brandon Thurston, I am John Pollock. Thank you to Dave Meltzer for joining us. And that is Pollock.